Well, let's bring in our first guest, Deputy Nationals leader Perrin Davey. Perrin, welcome to the show and thank you for your time. I want to start by talking to you. Thanks, Perrin. I want to start talking to you about the latest news poll. The Federal Coalition has pulled ahead of Labor for the first time in New South Wales. Now, this is big news. New South Wales is a key battleground state, as you would obviously be well aware. What did you make of this result?
Well, what this result actually shows us is that people are now waking up to the lies and the broken promises of the Albanese government. People are realising that life is not easier under Albanese. They are feeling the pain in their hip pockets, and they are seeing a lack of any moves to address it. They are seeing the broken promise of reduced power bills by $275. They're seeing the broken promise of we won't tax your superannuation. And they don't see any solutions coming from the Labor government. And thankfully, they are looking towards the coalition as a very credible alternative government.
Well, it is good news in New South Wales and in Queensland too, where they poll very well. But the coalition has lost significant ground in Western Australia, which did become the key to Labor's 2022 election victory. It also, while it also enjoys a majority support among male voters for the first time, the female vote still favours Labor. How much of a problem do you think WA and the female vote will be for the coalition, and how do they address that?
Well, I mean, the news poll, which is just one poll, and we always say the only poll that matters is polling day. But the fact of the matter is we still have work to do. We have to convince all Australians, regardless of what state they live in, that we are the government for their future, that we have the solutions that will give them a positive and beneficial future, that we will address productivity, we will address power prices, we'll address the cost of living. We have to reassure voters about that. We have to reassure particularly the female voters that our nuclear positive future that we're talking about will be good for them. It will provide their children with decades and generations of job prospects into the future while providing a reliable carbon neutral energy source. In a balanced energy mix, we are not saying zero renewables. We are saying absolutely we need renewables, we need gas, we need nuclear, we need a common sense approach. And we absolutely need to continue talking to all Australians about that. We can't take a look at this one poll and think we've done the job. There's a big task ahead of us, and we are up for that challenge.
Well, I'm glad you brought up nuclear, and I do want to come back to that in a minute, because there was some other polling that I referenced before which came out over the weekend as well on that. That was very interesting. But first I want to ask you about a story that's broken today. The Northern Territory Police Commissioner has announced another curfew in Alice Springs for the next 3 nights due to a recent spike in violent incidents. How will the curfew affect residents of Alice Springs, both adults and children?
Well, I mean, firstly, it's an absolute tragedy that it has come to this again in Alice Springs. The curfew, I'm sure it's welcome within Alice Springs. It's a short-term, temporary solution. It's a band-aid, so hopefully it stems the bleeding. But what we need to see is policies that will actually address the issues that lead to this youth violence, the domestic violence that is prevalent in those communities, the reliance and dependence on welfare, and some of the community dysfunction. We need to actually see positive policies about that. We've seen the principal of the Yuparinja School out and about again today, asking again for support for that school to at least have the capacity to build some boarding facilities so that the children who want to go to school can go and have somewhere safe to rest their heads at night and get the education that will hopefully lift them and their communities out of this vicious cycle that we're seeing.
Yeah, it has been so sad and depressing to see some of the scenes that have come out of the Northern Territory and especially across Alice Springs. And we'll be keeping a close eye on that curfew on Sky News. Let's go back to nuclear now, though. That poll that I mentioned, that shows an uptick in support for nuclear energy, and specifically in Teal seats, as only 23% of voters in Teal, Greens and Independent seats oppose it. Now, Perrin, what do you make of these numbers? It seems encouraging given for the coalition, given Peter Dutton's taking this nuclear policy to the next election, that more people maybe than expected are willing to accept the idea of it.
Well, absolutely, and it actually comes as no surprise to me. When you look around the world at what is happening, the support for nuclear power around the world, we've had a newly elected Labor government in the UK that have again committed to increase nuclear power generation. We saw 22 nations at the COP28 meeting in Dubai last year sign a pledge to triple nuclear power generation. It is known technology, it is clean technology, it is zero emissions technology. And when we know that the Greens and Teal seats, the areas where the Greens and Teals hold their seats in those electorates, we know that a lot of those people are very concerned about ensuring we meet a carbon neutral future, but they also want to be able to turn their lights on. They're practical people, and I think that they are now, as we get closer to the time, they're actually looking at what's out there, and they're not seeing a clear linear pathway from the Labor government's all eggs in one basket, industrial scale, intermittent wind and solar only policy. I mean, our policy is not nuclear only. Our policy is a balanced mix right across the board of all technologies and future technologies that might come forward. But we know nuclear works, and I don't understand why Labor won't get on board.
Okay, well, Perrin Davey, thank you so much for your time. We will have more on that nuclear issue a little bit later in the program when we've got an energy expert in. But joining us now is